All right, hello and welcome to Office Hours, where we answer questions, give philosophical perspectives, formulate and explore arguments, and deep dive into particular topics of your choice. Jay writes, trans women try to coax lesbians into sleeping with them by saying genital preferences are transphobic. I don't care if a trans woman gets every surgery under the sun to mimic a woman completely. It is similar to how I view fake meat and AI girlfriends. I only want the real thing. I cannot find the words to express why it is more than a matter of the material. Am I disgust with the proposition at all? Can you help me, please? This is a tough one, and there's lots going on here. There's basically two ways we could interpret the context in which lesbians might be being told this. We could imagine the sort of broader social narrative that is telling women that, or lesbians this, or we could imagine them being told directly by a trans woman, which is a man who has become, or is attempting to become a woman. I'm going to assume it's a little bit of both, and occurs at least sometimes in the latter mode. Sometimes it is a trans woman directly propositioning a lesbian. They're both very stressful. Being pressured in any way in this regard is very uncomfortable. In some sense, it doesn't matter, but it changes sort of how you might go about responding to this. But before we get to the response, let's unpack what's going on here, because there's a lot going on here. I think there's four main things. First of all, there's the coercive manipulations. Someone is trying to coerce you into having sex with them, which is pretty wild. But not only is there the coercion to sex, it's also backed by a kind of moral blackmail. They're saying, oh, if you don't do this, you're transphobic. So there's an allegation of bigotry or hatred there. But maybe more interestingly, third, we have expectations about sexual attraction and maybe a tacit understanding of what sexual attraction is supposed to be. And fourth, finally, maybe most importantly, we have this question about what is the relationship between sex and gender? Is it just material? Well, what is a real woman? To quote Matt Walsh. So, I have a lot of sympathy here, because if this is something that happens interpersonally, in real life, someone saying you should sleep with me or you're transphobic, there's a lot of layers built into what they're doing, and sometimes that can be packed really densely, and it's very common for people, when they're confronted with really densely layered insinuations and implications and allegations, sometimes explicit, packed together so tightly, to just feel overwhelmed, and to find themselves shutting down and kind of speechless. So, unfortunately, those moments where you're left speechless in that way can become points of vulnerability, where you either get pushed into agreeing something you otherwise wouldn't want to, or else later you begin to feel like, maybe I was wrong about this, if I didn't have a response to this. And you can begin to doubt yourself, and even begin to change your mind because you got confused and overwhelmed by somebody. So understanding and familiarizing yourself with these kinds of moves in advance can be really useful sometimes, not just to get yourself out of tight situations and out of being basically coerced into doing things you don't want to do, but kind of like for your soul, for lack of a better phrase. So I'll try to address these one at a time. The moral browbeating, the moral blackmails, in some ways the least interesting, but it's the most superficially important. Saying, have sex with me or else you're a bigot. That's emotional blackmail, and it's moral blackmail. And it's a very it's a twisted notion of morality to coerce someone into doing what you want for pleasure, or else they're an evil person. It's not even projection, because projection comes from like misguided empathy. Projection is your empathy coming to a false conclusion because you assume that someone else is doing what you're doing or thinking what you're thinking. This is not projection. This is a lot more like coached cruelty. It's like a Maoist struggle session. And I don't think in most cases the trans individuals doing this are aware that what they're doing is coached cruelty. Just as I don't think most of the left-wing activists who have been taught to say like every instance where a white man asserts himself is like racist, I don't think they realize the effect that they're having, nor do I think they're intending to be cruel in that way. They've been coached to do this by someone. So it's a very twisted notion of morality to say have sex with me or else you're a bigot, but it's far from the only twisted thing going on here. The allegation of bigotry itself is ridiculous. Doesn't quite cover it, because phobia describes an irrational fear of or hatred of something, and sexual desire is not just the absence of a phobia. Like this is a bad metaphor, but like most people are not arachnophobes. Most people aren't paralyzed by arachnophobia. That doesn't mean they like spiders. Maybe a better example. I have some very good friends, who are homosexual, but that doesn't mean I am therefore attracted to them. I'm a very straight guy. So, like the and you can actually phrase it the other way too. Not only is attraction not the absence of a phobia is not just the absence of attraction either. And this isn't just phobia in the arachnophobia context, it's also phobia in the, religious and political and sexual context as well. If I have a disagreement with fascists, say I don't agree with the political philosophy of fascism, that doesn't mean I'm afraid of fascism, or if I didn't have disagreements with fascism, it doesn't mean I'm therefore sexually attracted to it. But that's maybe taking our metaphor in a silly direction. So I'm going to take it a little bit further though, and this might be a bit of a digression, but I think it's a valuable one. It's a very valuable one. Given what trans individuals, and trans women in particular, keep doing, it's sort of an open question whether irritation with the group as a whole is something irrational. Phobia implies, you've judged a group without understanding it. Or you've judged an individual based on an assumption or a stereotype about a group. And there's this sort of almost Socratic implication that you can't possibly know enough in order to like prejudge an individual that's participating in the group. And there's a degree of truth to that. But insofar as an individual is acting out the ideals of the group and carrying the identity of the group, then judgments of the group will apply to the individual in that instance. And, not all of us are ignorant about the nature of what trans and the bigger, scarier word, which is queer, are. Queer is not a sexual identity. It's a political identity that is masquerading as a sexual identity. There's actually nothing intrinsically sexual about the identity of queer. Queer, a queer identity is an identity without an essence. What does that mean? What does that mean? And this is like anything that's say cisgendered is basically like you have the sexual preferences, the gender that you were born with or whatever, and they have queer as this large umbrella term that's supposed to capture everything outside of normal, cisgender. So it's a weaponized what an identity without an essence accomplishes, because there's a sense in which you can't have an identity without an essence. That's almost an oxymoron. But the essence is instability. The essence is not is defiance of categories. It's a weaponized non-identity as identity, which is actually designed ideologically to destabilize all other identities in order to generate revolutionary energy. And it accomplishes this destabilization by making people uncomfortable more and more until they either cave or overreact. And this is, ostensibly primarily targeted at, straight white men. So me, and Christians, so not me. But it comes for everything that becomes stable. I think gay men were the first, erstwhile allies that got thrown under the bus. But they're beginning to come for women too, especially the so-called TERFs, the trans exclusionary radical feminists. It's basically J.K. Rowling. I don't think J.K. Rowling is a TERF, but she's sort of TERF adjacent. So it's hard to understand what trans means in a modern context without understanding the queer political movement and purpose. Queer is a political drive to basically break down categories and to break down all to corrode and erode stability in all of its varieties, again, to generate revolutionary energy. James Lindsay talks about Herbert Marcuse and his idea of a biological foundation for socialism, which is not eugenics, but it basically what Marcuse says is that a revolution will only be possible when people literally cannot stand the status quo in their bodies. They won't be able to stomach or endure the way things are, and so they'll demand change. And so there is a bit of a conspiracy theory, perhaps, but a hypothesis that some things going on the radical sort of Maoist far left are designed to change people at the level of their bodies to make them incompatible with the world as it is. And so they will make revolution inevitable. And if gays or lesbians or any other group that otherwise might have been an ally becomes too comfortable in their identity, maybe they get too accepted, maybe they get too happy, maybe they get too successful, they will lose their revolutionary potential, and so that has to be disrupted. So how does trans fit into that? Well, trans are kind of, as far as we have reached to this day, sort of the end point and the biological expression of this idea. They are the living manifestations of where this disruptive ideology called queer goes. And these people have either been pressured into or personally leaned into this idea all the way, so to speak. So there's a sense in which talking about trans people primarily as if it's a sexual identity or gender identity, we'll get to gender in a minute, is actually a lot like looking at, chaste monks in a monastery and speaking of them primarily in terms of their sexual preference, which is chastity, rather than the religious beliefs that drove them. The religion is prior to the chastity, and the queer ideology precedes and drives the trans movement today. This is obviously not to say that there have been, no trans people prior to queer theory or anything like that. But there's a little difference in the numbers. We've gotten this explosion of people identifying as trans and all these other things and undergoing surgeries. So, anyways, all that's to say, maybe a hatred or opposition isn't irrational, isn't a phobia in the conventional sense. But that's a tangent. So, not being attracted to someone isn't a phobia, and a phobia isn't just the absence of attraction to someone. And it's a very twisted way to look at attraction. Assuming the person isn't being directly manipulative. Again, these people are largely coached to say these sorts of things. Coached by whom, you might ask? But they're taught to say this in order to make people uncomfortable, and but it is a segue into the interesting question of what does cause sexual attraction. There seems to be a problem in the trans community of people being unable to find other people willing to date them. Hence maybe the attempts to get to use coercion to get laid. And this is kind of point 3. Where does attraction even come from? If we're not attracted to this person, we're is that how attraction works? Sexual attraction is a biological function. It's not purely biology, but there is we like each other for a variety of different reasons. But there's a foundation in biology, and in reproductive capability, and this isn't just limited to heterosexual couples. A gay man is going to be more attracted to a healthy, more vital, more fertile man than he would be to an unhealthy, less fertile guy. And the same thing is true with women. There is also among... and here I'm going more speculative because I don't have much experience with this, but I imagine this is true with lesbians and gay men as well. There's also a genetic compatibility function. So, you might have two people who are both 9s, just like mind-blowingly hot. But one of them is has a little something in their in their immune system that you don't have, and you pick that up olfactorily. You pick that up by smell, and you're like, oh my gosh, this person is like what I need. And that's your body saying like, oh, we can make stronger babies. And, that's, again, regardless of whether that relationship ends up making offspring or not, is irrelevant to the experience of attraction. So attraction comes from the body. It's not purely body, obviously, but, to call someone phobic over attraction is in some sense to confuse the category of judging character with attraction of the body. Because there's all kinds of people that I like and admire in their character, and even sometimes in their body, that I'm not sexually attracted to. As it like a broad thing, I guess I feel this way a little bit about supermodels. Right? There's something elegant and beautiful in the body that they have crafted out of themselves, and also the genetics that they inherited. It's beautiful, elegant, very skinny bodies. Not my type. I'm just saying. And and perhaps gays might feel that way about women, like no interest in that sexually, but like, wow, I can appreciate and admire the body there. Attraction comes from the body, and it's more than just liking something or appreciating something. On the other side of the attraction equation, we have this phenomenon called the uncanny valley problem. And this is very, very commented on online. But basically, people that look somehow between, or things, I should say, that look somehow between human and non-human, or otherwise cross-categorical boundaries, can trigger an uncanny feeling that makes us feel creeped out. So standard examples would be things like certain kinds of masks and dolls, or clowns, androids or zombies, and a particularly socially interesting one are people who use too much makeup or get too much Botox injections. Can make us feel like this is a real person or not. There's something uncanny about this. Now, with the uncanny valley, which was, I think, coined in the domain of robotics and talking about androids, but it applies to lots of other things. Queer basically aspires to straddle categories and to cross boundaries and to confuse us at the level of our perception. I don't think they're trying to do this, but functionally, it's like they're trying to trigger people's uncanny valley response. And I think in some cases they actually do this intentionally when they're trying to provoke some kind of overreaction. They trigger a disgust response, but they're like only going, I'm only reading to kids. But the disgust response that they invoke in other people with how they dress and what they do, it's beyond just morality. They're triggering something deep in that, like, reptilian hindbrain, with the uncanny valley sensation of, is it a man, is it a woman? It's uncanny, actually. And so queer conceptually aspires for this, but trans very often embody this ideal in their biology, at the level of their face and their perception. And this is not to say that some trans people don't pass. Many trans people, I'm sure, do pass. But it's often not the trans people who got to the trans world through queer ideology. And also, if they're passing, you probably aren't being, they're probably not trying to coerce you into sex because you didn't know they weren't a woman. So the trans that are queer are often not even trying to pass. They're trying to straddle that uncanny valley, and then they're surprised when people are creeped out or turned off by that. And most people are, polite enough not to say that, but I don't think they're doing the trans individual any favors in the long run by holding back. So, there's a third aspect here as to why, a trans person propositioning might not be attractive. There's the social context, the not biology part. Regardless of what you believe about sex and gender, at some part of your brain probably feels like the trans woman propositioning a lesbian is just a straight man demanding sex. Like, you can believe what you want about that, what that is or is not, but some part of you feels like that's what's going on. Is this just a straight guy dressing up and trying to coerce sex out of a woman? Is this just the return of patriarchy, like the worst caricature of historical patriarchy, and telling the woman she's a bad girl if she doesn't put out? Like, it's crazy. Well, at least it's crazy from my perspective. But even if you are bought in on the gender identity philosophy and say, no, that is a trans woman, which is a woman. A trans woman is a woman. So it's just a woman propositioning another woman for sex. Some part of the woman's brain, and I think women actually have a stronger instinct for this than men do. The creep out instinct. Some part of their brain is probably saying, that feels like it's just a straight guy demanding sex from me. So, and that plays a role. That sensation is going to play a role in attraction. And a trans person can wish that all away as hard as they want. But attraction is not just a social construct. Which brings us to the fourth point. Like, what is the relationship between sex and gender exactly? What is a real woman? Is it something biological? Is it just the bits, or is there something else? James Lindsay, who I cannot recommend highly enough on this topic specifically, argues that gender, as distinct from sex, gender is just made up. It comes from a guy named John Money, and he wrote in the paper, he said, quote, all those things that a person says or does to disclose himself or herself as having the status of man or boy, girl or woman. That's what gender is. End quote. So it tacitly argues, no, I shouldn't say tacitly, explicitly argues that gender is a social construct. It's not something biological, like sex. And that is, it's essentially performative, that discloses ourselves to the world. This is identity finding and also identity creating through our actions and through our interactions with other people. Now, to say it's made up, to say it's a social construct, is not necessarily to dismiss its existence. But in this case, it, given the recency of it, it points to something with political intention rather than to something that's just descriptive and natural human behavior, which is how they want to sort of pass off this theory. It's like, oh no, we're just describing human behavior. It's designed to confuse a little bit because it creates an artificial category, which we're calling gender, which originally came from grammar and didn't have anything to do with sex or people even at all. But anyways, it creates this artificial category that's supposed to agree with biological sex, and then they'll point to exceptions where maybe, oh look, in this case, gender, which is this thing we created, didn't conform exactly to biological sex in the way you might expect. So things are a little more complicated. It isn't as straightforward as everyone thought it was. And it creates this muddy, murky water environment where now you need a guide to guide you through the complex, convoluted world of gender and sexuality. And look, they've been studying this for 25 years. They can guide you through. Excellent. Okay. What they're trying to do is they're trying to bring everything, to whatever degree is possible, from the domain of biology into reflexive environments. I'm borrowing George Soros's term here. A reflexive environment is, perhaps you've heard of the Heisenberg effect, where like, oh, you know, observation changes the behavior of the thing. I think the best example of a reflexive environment is the economy. As soon as you create a model for the economy, say, oh, well, we're going to have a bull run and then we're going to have a bear market. If that model becomes public, the thing being studied is people. And so once people become aware of the model, their awareness of the model changes their behavior. And so a reflexive environment is any environment where the subjects of of study are aware that they're being studied, and the study, their awareness changes the outcome. So sex and gender are, of course, a little bit like that. Most situations with people involved can be can become reflexive environments. And reflexive environments are very malleable, because opinion is malleable and it's gameable. But not everything is malleable. Not everything is a reflexive environment. Attraction, as mentioned before, isn't just reflexive. There is a lot of social input and culture that plays a role in what we're attracted to. So, like, we might like someone's fashion. Well, what's fashionable is a bit of a social construct. And again, that's not to say it's not real. It's just, it's reflexive. You know, we like the way someone dresses. We like the way that they've read the room and matched social expectations and did something that was a little bold, but still kind of within social acceptability. They're playing that game. They're doing that dance really nicely. And it's impressive in a very subconscious manner, and we're attracted to that. That's an example, I think, of a reflexive situation where there's something bad or ideological about pointing out that it's a reflexive environment. And it's a reflexive factor of attraction. But not everything is like that, you know. And your gender identity is not a reflexive topic like that. And what is a real woman? Well, it's biological. It's not the social performance, and it isn't just the bits. There's a sense in which woman, for someone other than the subject, for someone other than the woman, what we experience as a woman, my experience of my wife, for example, as a woman, or a stranger as a woman, follows a family resemblance model of identity. This comes from Wittgenstein, talking about how language works in his posthumously published Philosophical Investigations, which is much better than the Tractatus. He's basically, it was a backtracking of his original work, which said, you know, logic, language that doesn't correspond to visual images is strict nonsense. I'm simplifying, but what he came to later in life was like, no, that's not right, because there's a lot of language games that we play. There's a lot of legitimate ways we can use language. Language is a very good example of a reflexive environment. And so the sort of neo-Marxist, I'm going to start sounding like a conspiracy theorist, tinfoil hat wearer, but hey, I think James Lindsay is right. Neo-Marxists, or if you prefer the New Agers, because there's a lot of crossover there, are trying to move everything into a reflexive environment. And they're trying to do that in order to become creators. And in order to become their own creators. You can see that really at work with the trans stuff. We're creating ourselves in opposition to how we were born. It's an essentially religious move. But anyways, I'm getting off track. What is a real woman? It's a biological thing that we experience through this Wittgensteinian family resemblance model of features. There's something in the voice. There's something in, lots of these little cues. And these gender theorists have correctly picked up on a lot of these cues and said, people cue in on these little features and little cues and experience woman through these cues. So if a man, cuts his hair long and maybe dresses differently, he's moving more towards woman. Yes and no. He is moving closer to there, but he can't actually reach there because the identity itself of woman is not just the cues. That's just our experience of it, and our biology is so good at picking up on these things. People will talk about the incredible sense of smell that bears or sharks have. Humans actually have an incredible sense of smell when it comes to fresh rain or fresh water. We have like one of the best smells, senses of smell on the planet. And we're very, very good at picking up, on other people's identity. Sometimes we can't explain that very well. And this isn't to say that people don't get fooled all the time. But, the fact that many of these people don't pass sort of shows, despite putting in a lot of work, that we're actually fairly good at picking up on whether someone is a man or a woman at a biological level, because what we're attracted to fundamentally is that reproductive capability. And again, this is true even if you are a gay man or a lesbian woman. We want the real thing because that's where the reproductive potential is. But there's a sense in which it's more than that. There's a sense of like authenticity and just being who you are and being yourself that is lost if you're trying maybe too hard to become something. So being versus becoming is its own, deep philosophical dive. So we don't need to get into that here. I might be talking with that about that with Jack later. So, all that's to say, how do I put this? There's the manipulation itself is uncomfortable and unpleasant. No one likes to be pushed and told what to do in that way. No one likes to be told that they're a bigot if they don't do something. No one likes to be told they're a bigot generally. And there's something incredibly invasive about being told what you should or shouldn't be attracted to. And finally, what you should or shouldn't think another category is. All of those are incursions and invasions, attempted invasions of your mind, essentially. All of that's going to turn off attraction, but I think they're all, I think, very good illustrative examples of like, I'm losing my words here, but basically, why philosophy matters, because people do get taken in by this stuff. And I hope like going down the rabbit hole as far as queer theory and like the whole identity without an essence and how that plays out in the trans world is useful and is helpful in understanding. But like when you accept incorrect premises about the world, it can trickle down in all kinds of twisted manifestations lower down, in terms of behavior, in terms of how you dress, in terms of the expectations you have from other people. And some of it's very petty, but it's very telling. My wife once had a coworker who is married, but the coworker's husband, who had been into cross-dressing for a while, decided that he was trans one day. And he started dressing like very provocatively. And my wife's coworker was like, Is that what you think we're like? Is that what you think we regular women don't dress like this? What are you doing? It was like a caricature. It was like a caricature of what a woman is. So and I think there's a dimension of that going on too, where when you think in and this isn't just with the trans thing, this is with basically any coherence model of truth foundation worldview. If you think too categorically or too conceptually, you're likely to wind up with caricatures of things, not things as they are in the real world. You're going to end up with a caricature of a woman, not what a woman really feels like. And people can sense the difference between those two things. So anyways, I hope that's been useful explanation. But if you are confronted by an individual, maybe a long, extended explanation isn't the most useful thing in the world. What you need is something that's short and pithy, something that you can have in your back pocket that you can pull out the way that they have coached lines that they've pulled out of their back pocket. And I think the short answer to direct confrontations like that can be summed up in 3 lines, basically. 1, attraction isn't just the absence of a phobia or dislike. Attractions isn't the absence of a phobia, and a phobia isn't the absence of attraction. If someone says, you should sleep with me or you're transphobic, or like having genital preferences is transphobic, you can literally just say, no, attraction isn't just the absence of phobia. That's succinct and to the point, and it puts them on the defensive rather than them putting you on the defensive. Second of all, moral blackmail is coercion. They're portraying themselves as a kind of victim, but they're attempting to morally blackmail you. Do this for me or else you're transphobic. And sometimes the do this for me is implied. They'll try to get the coercion part first and then make the offer. Say like, oh, having genital preferences is transphobic. It says, no, making my morality contingent on believing what you think I should believe is coercion. And third, the final point there is, you're not a victim if you're trying to coerce someone into sex. So attractions isn't the absence of phobia. Moral blackmail is coercion. And you're not a victim if you're trying to coerce someone into having sex with you. You can practice those lines or come up with your own variations of them. Having set lines to say in response to some of these things can take a lot of stress and pressure off of you in the moment like that. For anyone else who's listening to this, if you haven't been in a situation where someone confronts you with some like densely layered allegation or some like really thickly constructed claim, and frozen up on the spot, you should experience that once, so you know what the experience is like, and learning how to be prepared. It's very much like being caught off guard in a physical fight. You realize you let your guard down in a moment. You're like, okay, I got to work on that a little bit later. And I think rhetoric in the public space can be a little bit like that too, although the stakes can be different. Not less high, but different. So anyways, I hope that was helpful. It's a very complex subject, and I can't recommend the work of James Lindsay highly enough. I might see if I can find a link to some of his works on queer theory in particular. But seeing trans women trying to coerce lesbians into sex is not good. That's not what a victim does, and you're not weird in finding disgust in the proposition and finding that that's not the real thing. So anyways, thanks for the excellent question, and I hope that was helpful.